Hey, is that the Twilight Zone you're watching?
Yeah.
I'm so happy to be joined on Night Rule. This is your first time on Night Rule. This podcast was under a different brand last time, Ben.
That's right. That's right.
But I'm so happy that Ben Burgis has returned. We're going to be discussing, I think, some of our favorite science fiction. So you're still, have you done your move yet? Are you still weren't you in Georgia?
Yeah, I was in Georgia. I'm still this is all a little, it's like a weird tangle of things going on here. But so my day job is still in Georgia. But my wife and I have both been working online since the beginning of the pandemic. So yeah, we moved back to Michigan, where I'm from, for the moment at least. It's it's cheaper to live here. We'll presumably be back in Georgia eventually, but there didn't seem like a good reason to keep paying for a apartment in Atlanta.
Well, I'm glad you arrived in one piece, and that the U.S. government wasn't decapitated while you were in transit. That would have made for some awkward conversations at some point. We can get into another time. Well, but great. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, the transit happened a little bit before that, although also, we had a little preview here in Michigan a long time before that, actually, like back in the spring. There was essentially a small scale version of that at the Michigan State Capitol, about the lockdown. But we're right now where I'm where I'm recorded from right now is probably the least the least susceptible to civic violence, civil violence, place that you can live cheaply, because I'm out in the middle of I'm in Roscommon County, Michigan. So it's literally the view out of the front yard on one end is just woods, this is pretty deep nowhere.
Oh, that sounds lovely. I've always wanted a view of the woods from the front door. Well, yeah, that being said, you never know these days. So if anyone does start breaking down your windows with flags and fire extinguishers and whatnot, just feel free to say, hey, heads up, I might need to come back. So I'm really excited to talk to you today, because I think we've both been rewatching one of our favorite science fiction shows, and we can expand out to other shows as well. But I know we both are looking forward to talking about the original Twilight Zone series.
There is a fifth dimension, beyond that which is known to man. It is a dimension as vast as space and as timeless as infinity. It is the middle ground between light and shadow, between science and superstition.
1959. It's funny how well actually that holds up. Is even just as radio plays almost. But yeah, we agreed to talk about maybe some of our favorite episodes. Do you want me to kick things off, or do you got one in the hopper that you're dying to throw out there?
Well, I don't know about dying to. I will say that when I started watching this, which was pretty long before we talked about doing this episode, I had it was pretty slow going for a long time, because I think the first bunch of episodes of the Twilight Zone, the first season, are honestly mostly pretty weak. That there I think that there are a few really solid episodes in those, but yeah, I think that most of it is not great up until midway into the season, when I think one of the first episodes that I watched that I thought was really was a really strong episode, was also, I believe, the first one that was based on a Richard Matheson short story.
Richard Matheson, very well-known science fiction writer.
Yeah. So if people aren't familiar with him, he wrote I Am Legend, which is better than the Will Smith movie based on it. And he wrote, and he also wrote the short stories that a couple of really iconic Twilight Zone episodes are based on, things that even if you never saw the Twilight Zone episodes, you probably know from the Simpsons Treehouse of Horror versions of them.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
And Third for the Sun is not one of those.
Sturka, hydrogen armament. You boys are pretty busy up there, aren't you?
Very. Hold the light, will you, Sturka? Long days, huh?
Long days.
Your department's going full blast, isn't it? It's coming, boy. It's really coming, and a big one, too. While we're talking here, I bet the military's getting all set. Got it all mapped out, I bet. Talk is 48 hours. You wait and see if I'm not right. 48 hours, we'll have 'em aloft. Then whoosh, up, over, and whammo. There goes the enemy. Obliterated, finished.
But what are they doing in the meantime?
What do you mean, what are they doing? Probably retaliating the best way they can. It's a big waste of time, let me tell you. We get the first licks, so they can't do much.
They can go whoosh, up, over, and whammo.
Absolutely. But not so many. Not so properly aimed. Not so skillfully carried out.
So instead of losing 50 million people, we lose only 35, huh?
You a defeatist, Sturka? That's dangerous
One
thinking.
of those, right? It's not one of the like super famous iconic.
Third from the Sun is the episode you're going to talk about.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, fantastic! Yeah, great choice.
Oh, this is a good one.
Yeah.
This is a good one.
Yeah, that's right. And I should say also that since Twilight Zone episodes like tend to be, pretty short and punchy. Honestly, a lot of them, not the one I'm about to talk about, but a lot of them like really are like, even a lot of the okay Twilight Zone episodes are basically just a lot of atmosphere and then a plot twist. So there's really no way to talk about it without talking about the plot twist. Which is to say, like, I just assume that we're going to spoil the shit out of this Twilight Zone.
I mean, I'm going to do my best to only spoil them, like, mostly, because the thing is, even the ones that I'm rewatching now, years later, if you forget about the buildup, there's still a lot of value in just watching them, even if you remember the twist.
No, yeah, for sure. So the Third from the Sun is about Will Sturka, who is a scientist who works in a military base. And basically, this is a scenario like, well, I mean, the episode, this is 1959, so this is actually before the Cuban Missile Crisis, but it's the kind of thing that was on people's minds, and this is that kind of thing that there are two rival powers who one assumes are the U.S. and the Soviet Union, although that's never spelled out. But as you start watching it, that's the assumption that you would make, that are both nuclear powers and that are on the verge of the big one of starting a global thermonuclear war with each other, and. So he's at this military base, they're making the bombs, and they're talking about how the bombs are about to be, that like any day now, the shooting and hence the apocalyptic nuclear exchange is going to start. And the whole thing, just from the beginning of the episode, it's this like really like the atmosphere is really powerful. It's this really like sort of sweaty, nervous like sense of the impending, like this impending
palpable sense of doom in so many of the scenes, in the domestic scenes. The family in a living room, basically terrified that they're all gonna be blown to smithereens at any moment, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right. So that's just like hanging over everything that's going on, but also adding, or maybe mingling, with the palpable sense of doom, is that it's also because of what's basically a state of war, even if I guess the war hasn't technically started yet, but everybody's on a war footing, and so there's like really, really intense surveillance going on. That people generally assume that they're being listened to, that any attempt to like have like a truly private conversation has to be done like in a really like, sort of standing in the bathroom with the bath running kind of way.
Yeah, it has a very like Brechtian or like almost like a McCarthyite kind of vibe. The one character who's like who's shows up unannounced for just an ostensible social visit, but they're all terrified that he's going to be blabbing, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like for anybody who's seen Mad Men. There's one of the first episodes I remember of Mad Men, which is a show that's like very, very far from being about this. But the first season is set in about the same time as this, 1960. And in fact, in Mad Men, there are like a few references to the Twilight Zone and characters watching it. I remember one of the copywriters gets really mad because Peggy says she doesn't like science fiction. But,
yeah.
And in Mad Men, there's this little nod to that, as much as again it's the last thing that the show is about. But there is a little nod to that atmosphere of McCarthyism, where there's like a sign-up sheet that's posted somewhere in Sterling Cooper, the ad agency. It's like a sign-up sheet for like a bowling league or something. It's nothing, but then one of the secretaries is like, "Ooh, I wouldn't want my name on a list." Since anything that's like you're putting your name on a list, so you'd be like then associated with whoever else's name on the list, would be something you'd be a little scared of. And of course, this is the science fiction extrapolation of it, so it's like really like ramped up to 11. So there's this palpable sense of impending doom. There's this palpable sense of being constantly surveilled and monitored for your loyalty. And against this background that that they think the bombs are going to go off anytime, that it's like like maybe within the next day or two.
They're expecting like their own country to be launching a first strike, basically, right?
Yep.
And to start it off. Yeah.
So and against this background, though, remember these are scientists. They have I think somewhere on the base a probably experimental spaceship. And they think, and this is done very artfully. Like I said, I think this is like, this is something like episode.
It's episode 14.
Okay, yeah, it's episode 14, and I think like there are a couple episodes that I do quite like before that, that I think are like standouts in terms of what comes before it. But I think this is like just in terms of structure as an episode, like how the story is built up. I think it's the strongest episode of the show so far, of those first 14 episodes. And so this is done very artfully. Like it could be a little goofy, or like you can definitely imagine a way of doing it that would make you think way too much about like, wait a second, that seems unlikely, whatever. But because they're sort of having these conversations in this kind of hushed way, sneaking around from surveillance while worrying that the world is going to end anytime now. Anyway, it's a really effective storytelling technique, and we're told that this spaceship could reach another planet where they've gotten some sort of radio signals making them think that there are people there and some sort of technological civilization, so they could go live there. And the big, like most of the episode, again, it's about this is the atmosphere, and it's just like this is probably the most. Like this is definitely the most plot driven of those first 14 Twilight Zone episodes, because it's all about tension and release. The suspense built up of them trying to escape, onto the spaceship and being terrified the whole time they're going to get caught and being chased through the dark and all of that stuff. And then being the Twilight Zone, there's a big goofy twist at the very end.
I mean, to be honest, we've gone right to the precipice. Like maybe we don't need to actually spoil the twist to talk about it intelligently. There's a beautiful shot, because you're right. Almost the entire episode, I'd say up until the last 40 seconds is this, it's almost like a chamber piece. It's almost like a B movie where it's just a lot of talking, and they're kind of making use of just like they're really making good use of dialogue to give it tension. But there's this beautiful shot where you see the ship they're flying in fly across the screen, and that's immediately where you go, wait a second, what's going on here? So maybe we don't need to spoil it. I don't know. What do you say? Should we give people a chance to see it for themselves?
I think in this particular case, like I think we might have to. I think to
okay, go for it.
Some of the others, we might have to spoil them, but this one, honestly, I think that, like in a way, even though the episode wouldn't be complete, like I think it does need the twist, but it's also like the twist isn't even the most interesting part of the episode. It's like it's like a perfect little note to end it on, but I think I think we can talk about the episode in a way that feels very complete without that.
Yeah, that's a great choice. It's interesting that you highlight that as kind of like a high watermark in the early first season, because the first episode I'm going to talk about is actually only 2 episodes before that. And I do think I do like some of the earlier ones, although, I think anytime you go back to a series this old, and especially an anthology series, like, yeah, there's huge variation. You need to be aware of that. And I think and that's why, like, you can look at the top, like a list of the top 50 Twilight Zone episodes and whatnot, and those kinds of resources are really important, especially because you're going to want to avoid as much of the 4th season as possible, because that's when they enforced the hour-long format, and it just really wasn't working that well. But the episode I wanted to talk about first is episode 12, What You Need.
Yeah.
Something for you, miss?
I guess I need some matches.
You don't need matches, miss. I'll tell you what you need. Yes? I think I know what it is you need.
What is it?
Cleaning fluid. Oh, very good cleaning fluid. Guaranteed to remove spots of any and all kinds. It's what you need.
Which is, it kind of has almost a very melodramatic, sentimental tone to it, that eventually turns a lot more noir, I think.
Something for you, sir? Shoelaces, maybe?
Is that what I need?
If not shoelaces, some nice matches. I have several different designs here.
Now, come on. What do I need? You tell me, old man.
One needs many different things.
Yeah, but what do I need now? What do I need tonight?
It's late.
What do I need?
And I think, like maybe a bit of the dialogue gets a little syrupy at certain points, but in terms of just like the sheer artifice of it, I love the opening narration. I think this is probably as good a time as any to say that, like, the writing of Rod Serling on this show, I mean, like, it has to be amongst some of the best prose written for a TV screen. Like when you listen to the narration, a lot of times it's just like, are we hearing this level of like a prose style like in many other places? This is this is a series from, what is it now, 70 years ago? No, 60.
About 60. Yeah, like I guess it started in
59.
59. So although it started late 59, so not quite 62, but yeah, more than 61.
Yeah. And I think I'll probably have to highlight the intro to this one in particular. I mean, it's in a lot of ways, it's kind of a simple story. And I think it's a good example of an episode where there's a supernatural element, there's a fantasy element, science fiction element, but they don't feel the need to really like go jump through all the hoops to explain it all somehow. There's basically this little old man who lives in a neighborhood in a city, and he goes around selling matches and shoelaces to people out of a suitcase. And a lot of really interesting overtones and themes of capitalism and consumption here, I think, as well. Of course, he has powers, he can see the future, and he uses those powers sparingly to help people and gives them what they quote unquote really need. And you see that play out pretty well with the early story. I mean, I always thought, actually, just as a quick sidebar, it would be really interesting to see kind of like a dark world version of this story where it's a little old man telling people what they need, but it's really not what they need, and it's something much more nefarious. I think that would be a really interesting kind of like...
that's kind of like that's the Stephen King Needful Things.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's this really great kind of almost mechanic in the story of this one that I really enjoy, where he'll give them something and the viewer has no idea what they're going to need. This, XYZ, this bus ticket, this cleaning fluid, this pair of scissors. And then there's a nice payoff of finding out, okay, that's actually that's how this person needed X, Y, or Z.
Right.
There's that great, and then there's the kind of tough, the heavy in the show is this kind of really rough gentleman who basically just like begins harassing this little old man, being like, I don't care what it is, but you got what I need, and I want it to keep coming no matter what. And again, this time I don't think I actually have to give away the ending either. But
no, I don't think you do for that one.
I don't think it's the best episode in terms of kind of the science fiction storytelling. You know, it's got a little bit of a melodrama thing going on, but structurally and just like even just the photography of it is really quite well done. It's got a very nice noir feel in a lot of the shots. We can go on to your next one if you like. I'm very curious to hear it because you brought the heat with Third from the Sun. By the way, do you figure is Third from the Sun better or worse than Third Rock from the Sun, you think, in terms of its cultural importance?
It's certainly better than that. I do remember that show.
What's your next one?
All right. Okay. All right. This is actually, I think, not on the level of Third for the Sun, but it's good in a different way. I do want to talk about it. So,
okay.
I think when you were talking about what you need, you mentioned the narration, and this isn't necessarily one that had occurred to me before we started recording, but I think it does also tie into something we were just talking about, which is that unlike a lot of anthology series, like it does have this consistent tone, even though obviously they're very dark or very sappy or very just like goofy and funny episodes, but it's all kind of playing within like a really well-defined feel. And so that makes me think of episode 36, which is called A World of His Own.
The home of Mr. Gregory West, one of America's most noted playwrights. The office of Mr. Gregory West. Mr. Gregory West, shy, quiet, and at the moment, very happy. Merry, warm, affectionate.
You really should be working, you know.
Gregory?
Greg, not again.
I have to.
Gregory, I'm home, darling.
No, Greg.
What else can I do?
Are you working?
Are you so afraid?
I hope I'm not interrupting you.
Oh, the season 1 finale, one of my all-time favorite episodes of any show. It's a great choice.
Yeah, so this episode is about Gregory West, who's a writer, and of course, like all writers who are in TV shows, he's like. He's very successful and beloved, and at least this is 1959, when that was a little bit less unrealistic than it was in like the 2000s, when David Duchovny was playing a literary fiction writer on Californication, who like people recognized in the street because literary fiction.
Well, isn't he's not just a writer? Isn't he a playwright?
Yeah.
I think he's like the best playwright in America, which is kind of a hilarious thing to think about now.
Yeah, right. Like okay, name the top 5 living playwrights, right? I think that that's something that I'm sure there are people who could, but it would also be like a little bit like, yeah, sure, like there are people who are really into bird watching, could name like the top 5 bird watchers, but it doesn't really have much purchase outside of that world, and I think the same is probably true there. But whatever. It's 1959. Arthur Miller, is probably still alive in 1950.
Yeah, I was gonna say I feel like Arthur Miller was definitely an inspiration for this character.
Yeah, no, for sure, right? Because, right, Arthur Miller, who of course was married to Marilyn Monroe, and got her to convert to Judaism for him. That's so he's sort of on that Arthur Miller level, as in terms of success as a playwright, and so in the beginning of the episode, Mrs. West sees him in his study in his lavish home, having a drink, and clearly at least flirting, and then I think making then at least kissing this Mary LaRoche, who's a beautiful young woman, and then she's trying to figure out, what's going on here. And basically, what comes out very quickly, and this is something where at least the sort of initial plot twist, I think you do have to talk about to talk about the episode, that he can narrate people into existence, basically, that he can start, that he narrates into a tape recorder, and then the people that he's describing come into existence, and this is how he has made Mary, the young woman that he's having an affair with, and then he can stick the tape into the fireplace. There's a fireplace in the study because, again, he's a playwright. He lives in this amazing mansion, and then when he puts the tape in the fire, they disappear. But then he can call them back by doing the same thing that he did originally, and they'll even, if it's the same character, they'll even still remember their previous iterations. And then actually, it's pretty rare for a Twilight Zone episode, especially I think a season 1 Twilight Zone episode, because so many of them, like we were saying earlier, are just a lot of atmosphere and then a twist at the end. That this is one where the big speculative fiction twist comes pretty much at the beginning, and then the episode is spent playing with variations on it, rather than like having, oh my god, here's the magical thing that's going on, being the shock at the end of the episode.
Yeah, it actually develops the conceit, and that, I think there's some really nice kind of layers in that episode. That's episode 36. The season finale of first season was 36 episodes in, which gives you an idea of how much of this shit they were churning out back then.
Right? Like in 1959, they made 36 episodes.
I'm pretty sure like all the actors were under contract for like the rest of their lives, and they kept them just like chained up outside behind the commissary. I think another thing I really love about that episode is it touches on a theme that I think you see in a lot of other episodes as well. But it probably handles it the best is just the theme of writing and creativity and imagination, and a writer bringing something into existence. I mean, really, you could say this episode is speaking to the fact that Rod Serling was bringing this show itself into existence, and it kind of spoke to that theme of the writer as almost like a godlike figure, or a quasi, perhaps a demigod of some sort. Do you think, am I totally off the rails in that, you think?
Yeah, no, I mean, there is definitely something there, especially because like Rod Serling himself actually has, like, they do the metafiction thing, and they bring Rod Serling, like sitting on a desk doing Twilight Zone narration. They actually like bring that into the plot of the show and make and make that part of and make that something that's actually happening within the episode.
Yeah, which is so brilliant. I always thought it was definitely the strongest season finale of like any show in my mind, certainly. It sounds like I'm a little more forgiving of the first season than you, though, but that's okay. It makes for interesting radio.
Yeah. I mean, I think there were a lot of like, I think in the first season, especially the first half of the first season, I think that from my point of view, like, the good stuff is gold, but I think there was I think there were a lot of pretty weak episodes, especially early in, and like some and there were also like this is something that's like I think maybe even season 2. I'm trying to remember, but either very late in season 1 or early in season 2, right? I mean, just to make this spicy, I will mention like what I thought was like one of the worst episodes, which was the one with the really religious guy who gets the trip with his wife to Las Vegas.
Oh, right, and becomes addicted to slot machine.
Yeah, he becomes addicted to slot machines, but then it's like the science fiction-y twist is that the slot machine is like sentient and trying to get him to play it, and then like it literally sort of does this thing where it's coming towards him across the room, and then he jumps out the window, which is like I don't know. I mean, like obviously there's a way that the Twilight Zone does cheesy that I really enjoy, but that I think crossed the threshold for me. It was like, okay, this is, you know, like this is not like silly in a way that it's like, oh, that's kind of awesome, I love this, you know, like that sort of like really good Twilight Zone silly. This is more just like this is you know, this is just like you know, it's something that I think was, you know, was an idea that you could kind of see how maybe like people came up with in a writer's room and thought was fun, but, you know, but I wish, you know, I wish they'd done without that. And there were some of those, and there were also just episodes in the first season where like, I even thought that the development of atmosphere over the course of the episode was pretty good. And the twist was kind of fun, but none of it necessarily adds up to much in the way of a story, because it's kind of at the end of it, it's like, okay, well, you just threw me some atmosphere and then there was a fun twist and then it's over. And, you know, I guess that is its own kind of thing. I mean, I'm watching the Twilight Zone on purpose. I enjoy that, but I think it's also just not nearly as good as some of the other episodes that we've talked about that way.
Yeah, I think that episode you're talking about with the slot machine, there's kind of a different version of that, and you often do see that with certain episodes. You'll be like, this is kind of a retread of another one that I thought they did better at another time. Like there's that great episode with William Shatner, Nick of Time.
Well, what have we got here? The Mystic Seer. Do you get a penny, huh?
I think so.
What'll we ask it?
I don't know.
I got it. Does anything exciting ever happen around here? It is quite possible.
The hand belongs to Mr. Don S. Carter, male member of a honeymoon team en route across the Ohio countryside to New York City. In one moment, they will be subjected to a gift most humans never receive in a lifetime. For 1 penny, they'll be able to look into the future. The time is now. The place is a little diner in Ridgeview, Ohio. And what this young couple doesn't realize is that this town happens to lie on the outskirts of the Twilight Zone.
Where he becomes addicted to like a little fortune-telling machine at a diner that he becomes convinced is seeing his future.
Yeah.
But it's ultimately, he's like a lot of it, you don't know if it's self-fulfilling prophecies and whatnot. And I feel like that one dealt with those themes and kind of had the right amount of wackiness mixed in as well. Yeah, World of All His Own is a great choice. The next one I wanted to talk about is it's not even necessarily one of my favorite episodes, but I think it's one of the most interesting ones to talk about because of some of the kind of like gender portrayals in it. It's an episode called The Lonely. Do you remember this one? It's a guy, he's in solitary confinement on an asteroid, like a million light years from Earth. Yeah. And it's a very famous actor that plays the guy. I mean, again, I feel like that's actually one element that almost makes watching The Twilight Zone all these years later dreamlike is you're constantly bombarded with all these faces that you've seen from 1,000 other things.
Yeah.
They're usually a little bit younger and obviously like a little less prominent. Like there's an episode where young Robert Redford shows up, for example, and you're like, whoa, it's like he's so young and barely recognize him. He's stuck on this asteroid. He's been convicted of murder, and it's his punishment to be on this asteroid. For some reason, they found it more economical to send people to asteroids instead of building prisons. We won't question that. And maybe, it's just
maybe it was some kind of like maybe it was some sort of reform. That it's like more humane to put people on asteroids.
Makes sense to me. So I mean, he's stuck there. He's lonely. He's losing his mind. Interestingly, the crew. His jailers have left him some sort of like vintage classic car that he spends like a year just taking apart and putting back together. But then eventually one day they show up with a special package in the form of a female robot, or what they all call her in the episode a robot. A robot. No, she's not a robot. She is a robot.
It's just the way that Zoidberg pronounces it in Futurama.
Exactly. So this is yet another entry into the sexy robot genre of science fiction. But what I've always found so fascinating about this episode is really, if you were to look at it with like a feminist lens, it really like reveals a lot about the kind of subtextual commentary on women's place in society.
You are now the proud possessor of a robot built in the form of a woman. To all intent and purpose, this creature is a woman. Physiologically and psychologically, she is a human being with a set of emotions and a memory track. The ability to reason, to think, and to speak. She is beyond illness, and under normal circumstances should have a lifespan similar to that of a normal human being. Her name is Alicia.
My name's Alicia. What's your name?
Get out of here. Get out of here. I don't need a machine. Go on, get out of here.
My name's Alicia. What's your name?
The robot, as soon as he activates her, you know, he hates her. It's like, you know, this is some horrible machine. I don't want this. And kind of like pushes her down even.
Yeah.
And she falls down and then she starts to cry and she starts to show emotion. And like, that's what kind of starts to change his thinking about her. And I feel like it speaks to like this suspicion that men have of women and their emotionality and the dynamics of that. And then of course, you know, over time, given that he's so lonely, he stops thinking about her as a robot and he starts to think of her as a woman, and they're happy together for, I think it's like a year, 6 months or 8 months or something. But then kind of the big plot twist at the end is the ship comes back and he's gotten a pardon so he can go back to Earth. But even though they've brought over like a vintage car that probably weighed like a ton, they don't have enough space on the ship to bring the female robot back. So he not only has to abandon her, but he's like so hysterical about it that the captain of the spaceship shoots her in the face. He's like, I'm sorry. I wish I didn't have to do this. And then boom, and he blows her away. And it's just like, there's this moment of just like horror at it almost. But then, you know, that he just says, come on, Corey. It's all behind you now, Corey.
Yeah.
And they just go off. And I've always just found it to be like a really fascinating episode because it has that great Rod Serling humanitarian kind of undertone to it, but obviously also like really shows a lot of the kind of thinking at the time, you know, in the late 50s about like men and women and their place in society.
Yeah, for sure. Which is actually as you were saying that about the kind of absurdity of saying that the robot, that they didn't have the space or the weight, capacity to put the robot on the ship. This reminds me that there is like this much later in the show. They did an episode based on it. I just looked that up. But there's this like classic short story from. Okay, I'm not sure when the short story was from, but I think it's like a 1950s maybe science fiction story called The Cold Equations, which is like which is a sort of trolley problem-y, like utilitarian, like agonizing about killing innocent people thing. That's based on that same premise about a spaceship where you only have so much carrying capacity.
Who is that sociologist that always talked about scarcity? It's like a classic like scarcity thing. That like device in a story. Oh, we only got so much weight. It's like or like people talk about sometimes like lifeboat problems and ethics. It's that kind of idea for sure. I think there's probably a whole subset of people that like deep down, if they were ever found themselves in that situation, it would be like the culmination of a lifelong fantasy. Like there's a great line in Peep Show where they have to start rationing their chocolate, and Jeremy's just thinking to himself, you've been waiting your whole life to do rationing on me, Mark. This is your sick, twisted dream.
Yeah. It's like or to lower the tone of the conversation, like that episode of South Park where people get snowed in and they start eating each other, and it's like, come on guys, we've only been snowed in for a couple hours. You all had big breakfast, what's wrong with you?
Yeah, exactly. So do you want to stick with Twilight Zone, or should we expand out into other realms, but like beyond the fifth dimension that is unknown to men?
That's right. Which, God, I watched so many of those episodes. I think I had that committed to memory that I was like really jolted when they switched up the opening. That's right. More timeless than infinity, and between the realm of man's fear and his...
No, it lies between the pit of man's fears and the summit of his knowledge.
That's right.
One of my favorite variations is, that's the signpost up ahead. Your next stop, the Twilight Zone. Have you ever seen, actually, there's an amazing episode, I think it's Jack Benny, where Rod Serling appears, and then they kind of do a little mini Twilight Zone episode on that show. It's so funny. Like the story is they bring him in to work with their writers or whatever, and they do like a comedy sketch kind of thing. But then it turns into an episode of the Twilight Zone. It is so fucking brilliant. You could not miss it.
Nice.
I can talk about one more episode before we move on. And I think this one is a good example of I think the way in which I think the show often deals with very everyday themes, while kind of taking it to obviously like a kind of a science fiction extreme. It's an episode called I think it's called It's a Good Day. You remember this one?
When was it?
It's it's season 5, I believe. It's one of the later ones, and it's got its own special introduction. So like the world there's this little town that's been cut off from the world, like basically like a bubble came down around it, and the people inside don't know if the world just disappeared, if the whole town was transported somewhere. But there's a monster in the town. And Rod Serling introduces you. He says, "Oh, this is so-and-so. That's his barnyard that the monster lives in. And this is Aunt so-and-so. She had the most control probably over the monster at one time." And then the monster is, of course, this like 8-year-old boy. And this was done into a Simpsons episode very famously as well.
I have seen this episode. That's right. When you were talking about the town being cut off, I didn't make the association, but yes, I have seen this. This is an amazing episode. I love this.
Oh, this is a good one.
For sure. And then, so the premise is that this 8-year-old kid who's, prone to temper tantrums, he's like a child, like any other. He has the power in his mind to read people's thoughts and then do anything he wants with his mind. So he'll send people off into the cornfield.
That's Bill Soames' car. That's that dog that comes around.
Not many dogs left now, Anthony. You wish them all away.
That collie dog, he doesn't like me. He's a bad dog.
Anthony, did you do something to Bill Soames' dog?
Early on, there's a scene where the neighbor's dog is barking, so he just he just thinks him into unexistence. And the acting in it is so brilliant because all the townspeople are just so terrified, but they have to perform and they have to pretend like everything is just so wonderful all the time.
It's good that he did that.
Yeah, it's good you killed the dog. That's great. That's wonderful. And just the tension of it. It's another episode that just has this great underlying tension to it that builds. But I also think it kind of speaks to, I think, probably a lot of parents, a lot of people who would have experience like with kids, understanding that like you can't just only do positive reinforcement with kids. And maybe it was written with this idea that people were just too busy telling their kids that everything they did was great, and kind of further like just turning them, like, for lack of a better term, infantilizing them, right? And perhaps even infantilizing the whole world. There's this amazing scene where once a week the kid will sit down and then with his brain make television appear on the TV screen.
That's all the television there is.
Oh, it was wonderful, Anthony. Wasn't it, everyone?
Oh, that was real good.
Wasn't Anthony's television wonderful tonight?
Oh, it's just the best.
It was much better than the old television.
Much better.
But it's only ever like the most horrific, just like giant monsters fighting each other. And it's these horrible sound effects that are just so like demented and terrifying, and everyone's sitting there smiling and they're like, oh, that's so much better than the television we had before. And wow. And so there's like a commentary on television and media there as well. I mean, you'd see it's not exactly like that hard to pick up on that, but that's definitely one of those later episodes once they return to the 23-minute format that really stood out for me, that I would definitely recommend.
And it's a really interesting commentary on it too, because it's because the Twilight Zone, not all of it by any means, but I mean, like, one of the main genres that it plays in is horror. So having like sort of highlighting how horrific it is to like that, highlighting the strangeness of sitting around watching TV where horrible things is happening is like a little bit of a like it's a little bit of a sort of I don't want to say a self-criticism exactly, but I mean I think part of what they're doing has to do with the fact that you're watching this on the Twilight Zone where very horrible things frequently happen.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Like
There's
I was just
very meta aspect to it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's like I always thought in Quentin Tarantino's movie Inglourious Bastards, one of the most brilliant things in that movie is there's a scene where they're watching this the movie within the movie, which is like, was it Nation's Glory or something like that, but it's like a Nazi propaganda film, and it's just guys getting shot for a couple hours apparently, and the scene where all the Nazis are watching this war movie and they're just like enjoying the shit out of watching everybody being shot in the movie is like, also I remember thinking the same thing there. It's like, okay, this is Quentin Tarantino having a little fun with like this awkward thought about people watching Tarantino movies.
Right. Yeah. Pretty clever. Yeah. I think definitely Sterling and Tarantino were kindred spirits to a certain extent in that way, although very different stylistically and in tone, shall we say. I mean, have you bothered with any of the follow-up series? I'll just quickly ask you, because I haven't really, and I really don't think, if Twilight Zone isn't 22 minutes and it isn't in black and white and it's not from like more than 50 years ago, I'm not necessarily that inclined. Although some people like the new series.
I mean, I'm pretty, I know, and I'm sure it's fine. I'm not terribly inclined to do that, and maybe I will someday. But I'm also kind of this I don't know, like I watching a version of the Twilight Zone that that's from even the 1970s, never mind right now, sounds very strange to me.
Yeah. All right. Well, yeah, everybody, there that we'll cap off our Twilight Zone discussion there and move on to maybe some other science fiction. But even just preparing for this discussion has been super fun. So yeah. I think everyone really should check it out if they're inclined to check out some of the like really interesting television that's been produced through history. I mean, it's it's old. There's a little bit of an adjustment to the production values and whatnot, but in terms of writing, well worth the effort.
Wow.
We talked about talking about movies and books. Like, what's the next science fiction opus you wanted to add to the docket for today's Night Rule Science Fiction Court?
So that's hard. So let me think. I guess one. I mean, when I think about science fiction in general, like one of my favorite things in science fiction is time travel stories, and in particular, like I have a huge weakness for the rare internally consistent time travel story. Although I also like ones that play with it, like like the what was that movie, Loopers, where there's that line where the version of the character, I think it's Bruce Willis, from the future, is talking to his past self, and they're in a diner, and the past self is asking him a bunch of questions about how it works. He's like, "Look, we can't get into this time travel shit, or we're going to be here all day trying to diagram things out with the Force." Or like the Simpsons Treehouse of Horror time travel episode, where Homer said, it's like telling himself, remember the advice that your father gave you on your wedding day. And he flashes to Grandpa Simpson telling him, if you ever travel back in time, don't change anything, the smallest effect could ever ripple.
Right.
But that said, I think some of the kinds of stories that I like the most are the internally consistent ones where you can't go back in time and change the present, because that doesn't make sense, because by definition you're traveling into the past, so whatever you do already happened, already had the impact it was going to on the present, which in some ways limits the dramatic possibilities once you kind of piece that together. But in other ways, I think it creates the possibility of one of the most fun kinds of time travel stories, which are the causal loop stories, where whatever's being done, whatever's being done in the past helps to create wherever people went back. So I guess I'll just say for this category, a couple that I've always been very fond of are the very first Terminator movie, which is like I think one of the classic causal loop stories.
What day is it? The date!
12th May, Thursday.
What year? I'm here to help you. I'm Reese. DN 38416, assigned to protect you. You've been targeted for termination.
Why does it want me? Why me?
And also is just a fun atmospheric movie, like the
very dark, so dark. Like it's really hard to remember how dark that movie really is.
Yeah, especially because I think in a lot of ways, in a lot of people's minds, was eclipsed by Terminator 2, which is obviously like a classic in its own way and a very big budget movie, but not anything like it's like one of the all-time best action movies probably. But I also think in a lot of ways a much less interesting movie than the first one. And the first movie, it is very dark and it's very like there's something about the brutality of it, the specifically that the way that they're trying to kill Sarah Connor so that her son John doesn't become the leader of the human resistance once the robots take over, that the way that they're trying to kill her is just by going through the phone book, killing everybody named Sarah Connor.
Yeah.
And
it's horrifying too. Like they're going and shooting waitresses and it feels very real. The whole world feels very grounded in that film, which is kind of what gives it this really horror kind of like punch.
Yeah, absolutely. And in a lot of ways, it's structured as a Western that that a lot of the first like half of the movie is basically the two gunfighters coming to town and sort of sizing each other up and circling around and preparing to confront each other. And it's they do have that kind of atmosphere that the actual they sort of do a nod within the movie to the atmosphere of the movie that the nightclub that Sarah Connor hides out in from Schwarzenegger at one point in the movie is called Techno Noir. That's the name of the club that you see at one point.
Right.
It's this very I think, as we found out when they did Terminator Salvation, it's much better for the stuff in the future in a movie like this to just be like occasional little flashbacks rather than really trying to dwell there and have a whole movie there. But the way that the flashbacks work, is really effective because, and this is part of what gives it that dark atmosphere that you're talking about, because you already know that the apocalypse is, that's the whole premise of the movie, that it's going to happen, and really the the big upshot, the big victory at the end in Terminator 1 is not that they're going to stop the apocalypse. I think they actually know that they can't. It's that at least John is going to be born, so there'll be some hope of something after that. But Skynet becoming conscious and nuking the world, I mean that's just a given, and the whole thing, that's this of course it's funny now because I can't say these words without thinking about QAnon, but that's the storm that's coming they refer to in dialogue at the end of the movie, that there is going to be Judgment Day, that when Skynet becomes conscious and destroys most of the human race. It's a really powerful kind of dark atmosphere that Kyle, who goes again, that's the very elegant little causal loop where Kyle goes back in time in order to save, is set back in time by John Connor, while back in time becomes John Connor's father. So if Connor hadn't sent him back in time, he wouldn't have existed to send him back in time. And that's and it's a nice, like I said, it's something I know some people have a hard time wrapping their mind around. There's a British philosopher named Nicholas J.J. Smith who has this nice academic paper about time travel paradoxes. It's called Bananas Enough for Time Travel, because the idea is okay, what happens if you go back in time and try to kill your grandfather while you slip on a banana peel or something? And because clearly you didn't succeed. And he has this nice phrase in there, which I think it nicely explains why a lot of science fiction stories, movies about time travel don't really make sense, called the second time around fallacy, which is the mistake that we make when we start thinking about this, when we think that there are two versions of the past. There's the version with the time traveler in it, and there's the version when, then there's the revised version without the time traveler in it. But then, of course, if you're traveling back to the actual past of our universe, there is no first version. There's just the one, which is how you get causal loops a la Terminator, and it's like it does, like when Kyle is like talking about his childhood, it's so bleak, because he grew up in this post-Armageddon, world with these robots called hunter killers, going around trying to wipe out the remaining humans. But it manages to have like it manages to feel very slightly hopeful at the end, because at least they've saved Sarah, and she's going to have this baby who's going to be John. And she is, again, much like a Western, she's riding out into the sunset, or in her case, driving out into the sunset, to go to Mexico. And then they do this little finishing touch with this photograph of Sarah that Kyle was like holding on to, throughout his whole life, and falling in love with. That it turns out, like, that you see that photograph being taken at the end of the movie.
Yeah, for sure. I think I think I'm gonna put I'm gonna put on pause what I was gonna talk about now, because you've tickled my time travel bone. So I'm gonna go into the past and tell myself to ask you about a different movie now.
Yeah.
Because I always thought, in terms of its treatment of time travel, 12 Monkeys had a really refreshing and unique take on it, in that you could go back in time to study the past and whatnot to try and understand. I guess there was a pandemic in that movie, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right. Yep.
But you couldn't. But it had already happened, so you couldn't change the past. What did you think of that? What did you think of that film and its treatment of time travel?
I like 12 Monkeys. It's a good. I mean, I think along with it's on I think a pretty short list of movies that do internally consistent time travel. And I should say also, like, I like some time travel movies that do not at all do internally consistent time.
You don't ruin your good time by being like, actually, well,
No,
of course not.
For sure, right? Like I think Back to the Future is an amazing movie that's completely nonsensical if you think about it for 10 seconds, but
absolutely, yeah, on both counts.
But the fairy tale atmosphere, the like goofy humor, the like all that stuff, is so good, and it's actually also, since you were talking about gender stuff earlier, I think that there is something really interesting about Terminator and the Back to the Future, since they're both
Oedipal in themes.
yeah, exactly, right. They're both made in the 80s, and so it's like Reagan's America, and in both cases, the big thing that you're traveling back in time to do is to try to make sure that some woman, ends up giving birth to someone at the end. Of course, obviously Back to the Future is a unfathomably less dark movie than Terminator, because in Terminator, the danger to motherhood is that this relentless, remorseless robot that's literally going through the phone book, killing every random civilian named Sarah Connor, is going to kill her. And in Back to the Future, the big threat to motherhood is that the mother and the father won't date in high school. So it's a much lighter threat. But it's also but it's the same thing, right? Which is just interesting in and of itself.
Absolutely. Listen, maybe I know we said go for about an hour, so I'll start the wind down procedure. I'm going to put pause on my DS9 discussion. That also has an added benefit of people not yet knowing how much of a huge nerd I really am. So maybe we can pick up the Sci-Fi Chronicles at a later date. But I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you. There might have been some important events in the world. I don't know, maybe in the U.S. Capitol.
Was there an important event or something? Or?
Yes, I think Kanye and Kim Kardashian broke up, and people were writing about that. They were so upset. I mean, I've been listening to your commentary.
The president must be tweeting about that like crazy.
Oh yeah. Oh no, he is on Parler too. So I mean, I've been listening to your commentary, and I think it's been really, really fantastic. So I don't want you to have to just repeat yourself, but with just the few minutes we have left here, maybe you can get on your soapbox a little bit and admonish people a little bit and tell them, maybe what we should actually be thinking about, rather than what people might be talking about right now.
Well, I mean, look, I don't know how much admonishing that I want to do, but I will, I think like a really bizarre thing obviously happened, man, last Wednesday. It seems like a lot longer ago than that. But yeah, as we're recording this is literally less than a week ago.
Crazy.
This really feels like we're talking about something that happened last year at this point. But yeah, so last Wednesday, a really an incredibly shocking and strange thing happened. I mean, look, something happened that seemed more like something that would be a plot point in a science fiction movie than real life. That there was in the U.S. Capitol. What certainly, in terms of the theater of it, looked very much like like what would happen in some sort of horrible societal collapse, where it was almost like it almost looked like a scene. See, I can't get off the science fiction now. It almost looked like a scene from like the opening of The Stand. Like that. It was like that, which is also something I've thought about a lot since the pandemic started. Of course, yeah. There's in fact, the miniseries version of The Stand. They did that opening sequence where everybody was dying in hospital hallways while Blue Oyster Cult's "Don't Fear the Reaper" played in the background. I thought about that a lot in the last year, but in terms of the social collapse stuff that's happening at the beginning of The Stand, it felt like that, looked like that. But I also think it's important to recognize that just because you have like a lot of the imagery that would be going on in something doesn't mean that the thing itself is going on. That it didn't actually represent collapse on that level. That the basic institutions of the American state are going to be just fine. I mean, it's almost like the flip side of some of what happened at the end of the spring and over the summer with the post George Floyd unrest. Some of the theatrics of that, looked like what you get in a full blown revolution, like the police station burning down in Minneapolis. That was like a scene from the Arab Spring, happening in the U.S. Sure. But just because you have the optics of a revolution doesn't mean that you actually have a revolution. That the American state was never in any danger there either. And when I say theatrics, I mean I really don't want to minimize this, right? So I was talking about this with Anna Kasparian on the show last night. Yeah. So from Anna does a show, weekend show with Nando Vila for the Jacobins YouTube channel, and she's also, of course, one of the main producers and anchors at Young Turks. And so I think one kind of mistake that we can make about this is sort of doing the hipster thing where people overdose on contrarianism, as the very online have a danger of doing, and sort of say, whatever, it's not a big deal. Like, when I talk about the optics, the imagery, the theatrics, I don't want to miss the fact that like also several people died. Like this is a huge escalation of anything that you could have imagined happening in 2015. And I don't want to neglect that. I mean, like during the Brooks Brothers riot, leading up to Bush v. Gore, nobody died. Like this is a new thing. Yeah, I mean, some of those were the rioters themselves, not making good decisions. One of those was the cops, I think, in that moment overreacting, but also there was a cop that was killed by the rioters.
And I think another police officer committed suicide. In that wake. I'm not sure what the details are there.
Yeah, that second one, I don't know enough about that yet to know exactly what happened there, but at any rate, right? Like it's a very shocking development. It's certainly like a huge. I mean, if there's anybody out there who still needs a moral indictment of Trump, it's certainly that, right? It's a moral indictment of Trump. Throw that on the pile. That because he did egg this on, and that's of course shocking in its own way, or would be if not for Trump. And of course, I think the most shocking thing about it is that it was allowed to happen in the first place, because I understand there were tens of thousands of people at the original rally at the White House, and a lot of those walked over to the Capitol from there. But I think the actual group storming the Capitol, the estimates I've seen go from like a few hundred, like several hundred, to maybe 2,000. And whatever the number is, like I think there are probably at least 2,000 Capitol cops, never mind National Guard, et cetera, that could have been called upon. So the fact that they didn't stop this, that that there weren't cops lined up, like, 4 deep on the Capitol steps to stop this from happening. In fact, that some of the Capitol cops turned down an earlier offer of assistance from the National Guard, that, some of the Capitol cops, on rank and file level, even as other Capitol cops were like fighting for their lives, elsewhere, were like taking selfies, with rioters. All of that. I mean, that none of that necessarily tells me like that there was a conspiracy with like a whole lot of intention behind it, but I think at least it tells me that both on a rank and file level and in terms of the upper brass, they were very reluctant to crack down on these people because they, on some level, they saw them as their kind of people. Like, I mean, this is something to remember always with this stuff, that the overwhelming majority of police officers in the United States are pro-Trump.
I think 70-80% by most poll data, right?
Yeah, something like that, right? It's a crazy number. It's not just like 55% of them voted for Trump or something. It's like an overwhelming majority. So all of that is incredibly disturbing, and we could sort of spin out various scenarios about how that could get worse, like some of which are pretty bad. I think are possible. I mean, I'm not going to pretend to have a crystal ball. I didn't see this coming, but I think that there are scenarios where the level of political violence that happens in the United States gets much worse than it has been, and that can be scary to think about. But I also think that there was never any point in any of this where there was a danger of this becoming, and I know there are a lot of semantic arguments about, okay, what counts as a coup or an insurrection or whatever. And like, I'm not like, let's not get into any of that right this second, but whatever you want to call it, there was never any danger that this was going like there were very real dangers here. I mean, like a lot more people could have died. Congressmen could have died for sure. But there was never any danger that this was actually going to touch the sort of core institutions of the American state, or what we politely refer to as American democracy. That like a couple thousand rioters, even a couple thousand rioters with a wink and a wink from the Capitol cops, are not a threat on that level. And the reason that I think it's important to emphasize that and to chill a little bit with some of the coup talk, and especially with some of the terrorism talk, is that I think that honestly, like the idea that we were going to like have like normal capitalist democracy overthrown and fascism imposed by like a mob of maybe a couple thousand QAnon guys doesn't really make sense to me. But I think
maybe a little histrionic. Yeah,
for sure. But actually also I should say, just one note on that like, if you look at times when that actually has happened, that there has been Germany or Italy, when there have actually been fascist movements that have come to power and overthrown the normal institutions, democracy, and all that stuff. The powers that be within those societies have only been willing to resort to supporting that because they were worried that the other alternative was like communist revolution and them losing everything. And that's not,
good point.
That is not remotely, that is hilariously and tragically far from the situation of the contemporary United States, where we have like 6.2% private sector unionization,
right?
And the Social Democrat, like there's a heady moment where it seemed like a Social Democrat might win the Democratic nomination, and that didn't happen. So that's not the situation, and I think that you see the upshot of that because the actual, like the ruling class was horrified by this. On Wednesday, the National Association of Manufacturers, the biggest business group in the country, was calling on Mike Pence to invoke the 25th Amendment to get rid of Trump. I think Coca-Cola, was tweeting about how bad this was. They this is something that's like that brings on a level of chaos that's just bad for business. So I don't think that the fascism thing was ever a danger. And the reason that, I think that a much worse riot where like maybe like a bunch of congressmen, got killed, I think that was a danger. I think a long-term danger is just an escalation in the level of political violence in the United States. I don't think that a civil war in the sense that most people mean by that is a realistic possibility right now. But I think that it's not impossible to imagine something closer to like, used to be called the Troubles, in Northern Ireland as far as political violence goes. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I think that's like a much more grounded worst case scenario.
I appreciate this level of nuance. This like we don't really have this level of nuance in the analysis that you're seeing on MSNBC or CNN. I think we need to add another acronym to that media sphere, GTAA.
Well, I appreciate that, but anyway, look. So the reason I think it's worth like really spelling out this point about fascism is not that it diminishes anything from the horror of either like the QAnon lunatics or people up to and including Trump who egg them on. Like they deserve all the condemnation that's coming their way. But the reason it's important is because I'm much less worried about the idea of some sort of danger to our liberties coming from this kind of fantasy scenario about America going fascist than I am about the danger to our liberties that is coming, right? That's going to happen. That I think no two ways about it at this point, at least in terms of proposed legislation, whatever actually gets passed. Basically a new round of the war on terror, which is what prominent Democrats are talking about right now. Like Joe Biden has said that one of his big priorities is having a new law about domestic terrorism, which, I mean, considering what's already on the books, like the idea of giving the American security state even more power to surveil people, to have to have whatever exciting new shortcuts they're going to get at the few legal impediments to them doing whatever they want, is actually genuinely terrifying. And I think that's like a much greater threat to freedom than whatever like a several hundred or even a couple thousand armed and dangerous like people who are basically like an analogy I saw somebody using in the chat on the show last night, which I liked, was it's like they're Civil War reenactors with live ammunition.
Yeah.
They're people who are just totally detached from reality, which doesn't mean they're not dangerous. It actually means that it's why they're dangerous, because they, they're willing to take this kind of live action role playing to that level of actually killing people. So that is itself an incredibly dangerous thing, but it's not dangerous on the level that could overthrow the core institutions of the American state. Whereas the idea of beefing up police powers, having like some new round of a new version of the war on terror that's focused on domestic extremism, like that's something that I would be much more worried about. And I guess the last thing I would just say about it is that none of this is to say, and by the way, I should say, like, there is a 110% chance that any new tools of censorship or broadening the definition of incitement or sedition or any of this stuff that might be, everything ranging from like, private sector censorship by the tech companies through whatever is going to be in this domestic terrorism law, there is a 110% chance that that's all going to get used against the left. Like I just don't think there's any
for sure. Yeah,
room for doubt about that. So that would be my highest priority in all of this. Although the last thing I was just going to say is that none of that means that what happened at the Capitol wasn't a big deal. And in fact, I think that it's important to hold both of those thoughts in your head at the same time, precisely because those of us who don't want to have some horrifying new round of the war on terror are going to be taken a lot less seriously if we're doing this like high on our own supply online contrarianism stuff where we just say things like, oh, this was like nothing, this was like a this is like a football ride in a college town or something. It's like, no, it's a little more than that. It's like, this is a big deal. It's just not a big deal on a level that's civilization threatening. It's like you can think the same way that you could think that that 9/11 was an atrocity and a massive human tragedy, obviously, while also thinking that it was a little ridiculous to treat what should have just been a law enforcement, what should have just been handled with the traditional tools of law enforcement, as some like great existential threat, to Western civilization. There's a great Glenn Greenwald line I always loved, where he was talking about how absurd it is that after decades of the Cold War, when there was a real threat of like an actual like civilization ending war, but we still managed to keep a lot of these civil liberties then like being told that we suddenly had to sacrifice them in order to defeat a handful of fanatics living in caves and plotting, to blow up an airplane or a nightclub every 5 years. Like it's just absurd. And I think we should bring that same energy to how we think about this, that you can, that you don't have to minimize the things about it that really are very bad. In fact, you shouldn't, because if we do minimize it, then nobody's going to take us seriously, when we speak out about everything that's going to be done in the name of combating it. But also, the greater threat is the stuff that's being done in combating it. Like the same way that a hell of a lot more Americans died in Iraq than on 9/11. I think that there is going to be, like the sort of threat to democratic norms from having an ever expanding definition of terrorism and an ever more hyperbolic, sense of what the threat is from that and what needs to be done to combat it is going to be much greater than anything that I think could actually be done by, the sort of like, QAnon lunatics, who thinks that Trump wants them to swoop in and save him when actually he could not possibly have more contempt for them.
Absolutely. I could not agree more. I agree 100% with everything you're saying. Always appreciate getting your insights on these things. I think you do a really great job of outlining some of the complexities and some of the kind of cutting through some of the countervailing oversimplifications. So definitely appreciate that. We'll have to goad you to come back on in February, Professor Ben Burgis. I think when we have this much fun, it's going to be hard to not at least try and goad and cajole you a little bit more. Everyone should check out your book, Give Them an Argument, also the name of your YouTube show and podcast. Please follow on Twitter for some pretty savage and trenchant insights. It was so fun to get to talk science fiction a lot too. I think we'll definitely have to try and do that again sometime.
Yeah, for sure.
And I'll do more of my homework this time, and I'll shoot you a message when this is out. I am going to edit it, try and add some ray gun sound effects and whatnot for the fans. So enjoy the rest of your night, and hope the family's all settling in well in Michigan, and we'll talk to you real soon.
All right, thanks, Isaac.